Welcome back to the deep dive. We tear through the research so you don't have to.
Yes, saving you from the detail avalanche.
Exactly. And today we're tackling something, well, incredibly frustrating, I think, for many people. Why do some really brilliant ideas, things that seem objectively better, just fizzle out?
While others, sometimes weaker ideas, somehow just take over.
Right. You see new technology, maybe a health practice, something that should work, and it just fails. Meanwhile, some inefficient old way sticks around. We want to know why the best ideas don't always win.
And that very frustration, that why, it's actually the fuel for decades of really intensive research.
So our mission today is to get under the hood, right? To figure out the hidden social machinery, the rules that decide if an innovation spreads or just dies on the vine.
Whether that's hardware, software, or even just a new way of thinking.
And the source material for this is, well, it's huge. We're talking about the entire field of diffusion of innovations.
Yeah, built on something like, what, over 5,200 publications, spanning decades, all sorts of fields, sociology, marketing, public health.
Communication studies. It's all in there. And the patterns, the way change happens, they seem remarkably consistent across cultures, technologies, you name it.
They really are. And maybe we should start with the core definition, because it kind of grounds everything else.
Good idea. What is diffusion, technically?
Okay, so diffusion is defined as the process by which an innovation, that new thing, is communicated through certain channels over time among the members of a social system.
So it's a specific kind of communication.
Yeah.
All about newness.
Exactly. And if you understand that process, you're basically understanding how social change itself works.
Okay, let's break that down then. The sources talk about 4 essential pillars. 4 things that need to be in place for an innovation to even have a chance.
Yeah, think of them as the foundation. If one's shaky, the whole thing can just collapse.
So pillar number 1.
The first, and maybe the most obvious one, is the innovation itself.
The new idea or object.
Right. But the key here is that it has to be perceived as new by the person thinking about adopting it. Doesn't matter if it's objectively brand new off the shelf. What matters is if it's new to them.
So that could be hardware, like a new phone model.
Or it could be pure information, like a political idea, a new scientific concept, even news about an event.
And you mentioned sometimes it's not just one single thing, right? It's more like a bundle.
Absolutely. That was a big early insight. Many powerful innovations are actually a cluster of things that have to go together.
Like the Green Revolution example.
Perfect example. It wasn't just the miracle seeds. To get those amazing yields, farmers also had to adopt chemical fertilizers, pesticides, and often change how they planted, like thicker planting.
You couldn't just take the seeds and ignore the rest?
Nope. You had to adopt the whole package, the cluster. That was the innovation that needed to spread.
Okay, that's pillar 1. The innovation itself, maybe as a cluster. What's pillar 2?
Pillar 2 is communication channels. Basically, how the message about the innovation actually travels from one person to another.
And this is where we see a big difference in what works for what purpose.
Exactly. You've got mass media, newspapers, TV, radio, big announcements. These are great for generating knowledge, for making people aware something exists.
Hey, look, this new thing is out there.
Right. But when it comes to actually persuading someone to adopt it, mass media's effectiveness just plummets.
Why is that? Why the big drop-off?
Because persuasion, it turns out, is deeply social. It needs subjective evaluation from people you trust, your peers.
You don't just trust the official brochure when you're thinking about a big change.
Not usually, no, especially if there's risk involved. Think about adopting hybrid corn back in the day, or even new software in your company now. You want to talk to someone like you, someone in your network. We call this homophily.
You need that personal confirmation. Does this actually work for someone in my situation?
Precisely. So interpersonal channels, talking to friends, neighbors, colleagues, that's the engine of actually changing behavior. Mass media just gets the awareness ball rolling.
Got it. Innovation, communication channels. Pillar 3.
Pillar 3 is time. Diffusion isn't instant. It unfolds over time. And the research looks at time in 3 main ways.
Okay, what are they?
First, there's the time it takes for one individual to go through the whole decision process, from first hearing about it to finally adopting or rejecting it. We'll dig into those stages later.
Okay.
Second, there's the dimension of innovativeness. This is about how quickly someone adopts compared to others in their system. Are you way out front, an innovator, or are you more cautious, maybe a laggard?
Right, where you fall in that adoption curve.
Exactly. And third, there's the rate of adoption for the whole system. That's where we get that classic S-shaped curve graphic. Slow start, then rapid acceleration, then it levels off.
Makes sense. So
Yeah.
innovation, channels, time, What's the fourth pillar?
The fourth pillar is a social system. Every innovation spreads, or fails to spread, within a specific context, a boundary.
So that could be anything from a small village to a huge company or even a whole country.
Exactly. It could be a school district, an online community, a professional network. The key is that this system has its own norms, its own leadership structure, its own history with change.
And those norms can make or break an innovation, right?
Absolutely. An idea that takes off like wildfire in one system might get completely rejected in another, just because the cultural rules or the social structure are different.
Okay, these four pillars, innovation, channels, time, social system, they set the stage. Now, let's get into the juicy part, why obviously better ideas sometimes fail miserably. The classic example everyone points to is the keyboard.
Ah, the QWERTY paradox. Yes, it's like the perfect monument to how inertia and social factors can trump technical superiority.
So the keyboard layout we all use, QWERTY, it wasn't designed for speed.
Quite the opposite. It was finalized way back in 1873 for those early mechanical typewriters, and the whole point was to be inefficient.
To slow typists down. Why?
To stop the physical type bars, the little metal arms with letters on them, from crashing into each other and jamming, they deliberately separated common letter pairs. It solved a mechanical problem of the time, not a human efficiency one.
And yet here we are, still using it, even though there's a much better alternative.
Oh, yes. The Dvorak Simplified Keyboard, designed in the 1930s, patented by Dr. August Dvorak.
And it's objectively better.
By pretty much every measure we care about today for typing. It puts 56% of the work on the stronger right hand. QWERTY puts 57% on the weaker left. Even more importantly, on Dvorak, 70% of keystrokes happen on the home row where your fingers rest naturally.
Wow, 70% compared to QWERTY.
QWERTY, a dismal 32%. So Dvorak means much less finger movement, less strain, potentially faster typing. Studies confirmed this.
It even got approved by standards institutes, right? So why didn't it take over? Why are we stuck with QWERTY?
Because the technical advantages were just completely swamped by the social system, by the entrenched interests.
Meaning?
Think about it. Every typewriter manufacturer was tooled up for QWERTY. Every typing school taught QWERTY. Every existing typist would have to go through the pain of retraining, maybe a week or two of feeling really clumsy again.
So the switching costs were just too high for everyone involved.
Massively high. It created this huge institutional resistance. Compatibility with the existing standard, even an inferior one, just crushed the technically superior newcomer. Vested interests won.
That's a hardware example driven by industry inertia. But sometimes the failure is purely about culture, isn't it? Like that water boiling study in Peru.
Ah, yes, the Las Molinas case. A classic diffusion failure study. A public health worker, Nalita, spent 2 years trying to get 200 families in this Peruvian village to boil their drinking water. Basic hygiene, right? Reduce disease.
Seems straightforward. How did it go?
Complete failure. After 2 years of effort, showing them germ theory under a microscope, everything, only 5% of the families adopted the practice. About 11 households.
Why? Boiling water isn't complicated?
It wasn't about complexity, it was about compatibility, or rather, the lack of it. The innovation clashed deeply with their existing cultural beliefs about health.
How so?
In their traditional view, health was based on a balance of hot and cold. Foods, liquids, illnesses were classified this way, and boiled water was considered hot.
Okay.
So, culturally, hot things were only appropriate for people who were already sick. If you were healthy, you consumed cold things. Drinking boiled water when you were healthy was basically signaling to everyone that you were ill, or maybe even like inviting illness into your body.
Wow. So adopting it for prevention meant violating a really fundamental community norm. You'd basically be saying, I'm sick, when you weren't.
Exactly. The social meaning completely trumped the technical health benefit. And the research found something else fascinating, too.
What was that?
The main person who did adopt, this woman called Mrs. B, wasn't even typical. She was kind of an outsider, a bit marginalized in the village.
And why did she adopt? Did she suddenly believe in germ theory?
Nope. She adopted explicitly to try and gain favor with Nalita, the health worker, who she saw as a high-status visitor. She wasn't boiling water for health. She was using the adoption as a social strategy.
To improve her standing.
Right. It perfectly shows that diffusion isn't just about the tech or the facts. It's deeply, fundamentally a social process. Cultural fit and social norms often matter more than objective superiority.
Okay, so structural barriers, cultural barriers. They can kill great ideas. Let's zoom in now on the individual level. How does a person actually decide whether to adopt something new? The sources outline 5 stages of the innovation decision process.
Right. This is the mental journey, if you like, that an individual or maybe an organization goes through. And again, time is crucial here. It's a process, not an instant decision. Stage 1 is knowledge. This is where you first become aware that the innovation exists, and you get some idea of how it functions.
This is where mass media often plays a big role, right? Just getting the word out.
Exactly. But there are actually different types of knowledge. There's awareness knowledge, just knowing it exists. There's how-to knowledge, understanding how to actually use it properly. And then there's principles knowledge, grasping the underlying theory, like the germ theory behind boiling water.
And often, people stop at awareness, maybe.
Often, yes. Getting deeper usually requires more effort. And research shows that people who get knowledge earlier tend to have higher social status, more education, more exposure to mass media.
Okay, so after knowledge comes.
Stage 2, persuasion. This is where you move beyond just knowing about it and you start forming an attitude. Is this thing good for me or bad? Favorable or unfavorable?
And this isn't just about the facts anymore.
Not at all. This stage is dominated by subjective evaluations from your peers, your social network. You're asking, what do people like me think? Does it really work in practice? What are the risks and rewards for me? It's driven by those interpersonal channels we talked about.
Trusting your friends over the advertisement.
Pretty much. Then comes stage 3, decision. This is the moment of truth. You weigh the pros and cons, influenced by that persuasion stage, and you choose to either adopt the innovation or reject it.
Adopt or reject. What happens if you adopt?
You move to stage 4, implementation. This is where you actually put the new idea into practice. You start using the new software, you plant the hybrid corn, you start boiling the water.
And this stage can be tricky, right? Learning curves, maybe problems arise.
Definitely. It requires effort, adaptation, and this stage isn't really over until the innovation becomes routine, until it's just part of your normal way of doing things, until it's institutionalized.
Okay, implemented and routinized.
Oh.
It's at the end.
Not quite. There's a final stage, confirmation. After you've made the decision and started using it, you subconsciously look for reinforcement. You want evidence that you made the right choice.
Like looking for positive reviews after you bought something.
Kind of like that, yeah. If you get positive feedback, see good results, hear positive things from others, it confirms your decision, and you continue using the innovation.
But what if the feedback is negative?
If you have bad experiences or hear strong conflicting messages, maybe from peers who rejected it, that can lead to discontinuance. You stop using the innovation even after adopting it initially. Or sometimes, someone who initially rejected might see positive results from others and reverse their decision later. That's rejection reversal.
This whole 5-stage process seems particularly challenging for certain kinds of innovations, specifically preventive innovation.
Oh, absolutely. Things designed to stop a bad thing from happening in the future, wearing seatbelts, safer sex practices, family planning, getting vaccinations. They face a huge uphill battle in diffusion.
Why is that so much harder?
The core problem is the relative advantage. One of the key characteristics people look for in an innovation is really weak, delayed, and uncertain.
What do you mean?
Well, if you adopt hybrid corn, you see a bigger harvest this season. It's tangible, immediate. If you wear a seatbelt or use contraception or get a vaccine, the reward is the absence of something bad. The accident you didn't get injured in, the pregnancy you didn't have, the disease you didn't catch.
Which is invisible. And you can always think, well, maybe the bad thing wouldn't have happened anyway.
Exactly. You invest time, effort, maybe money or social discomfort now for a non-event in the future. It's easy to rationalize that it wasn't necessary. The perceived benefit is low, which makes the adoption rate naturally much, much slower.
The system's kind of rigged against preventing the unseen then.
In a way, yes. The feedback loop is broken.
So if that delayed, uncertain reward isn't enough motivation, what actually pushes people to adopt preventative measures? How do you turn a generally positive attitude into actual action?
Often you need what the research calls a cue to action.
A cue to action, like a trigger.
Exactly. It's some kind of event. It could happen naturally, or it could be created through a targeted communication campaign that suddenly makes the threat feel real and personal. It crystallizes that vague, positive attitude into urgent action.
Like what? Give me an example.
Maybe a friend gets seriously ill from smoking, and that triggers their whole peer group to finally try quitting. Or a pregnancy scare pushes a couple to actively seek out family planning methods they were only vaguely considering before.
So it takes something dramatic to make the abstract risk feel concrete.
Often, yes. These cues bridge the gap between knowing you should do something and actually doing it, especially when the reward is just the avoidance of a negative.
Okay, let's circle back to the implementation stage for a moment. You mentioned people adapting the innovation. There's this fascinating idea called reinvention.
Yes, this is a really important finding, especially from more recent decades of diffusion research.
Hmm.
Initially, researchers kind of saw users modifying an innovation as, well, as noise, as messing up the purity of the adoption process.
They thought people should adopt it exactly as designed or not at all.
That was the early assumption. But it turns out reinvention, which is the degree to which users change or modify an innovation while they're adopting and implementing it, happens all the time.
How often?
Some studies suggest it happens in maybe up to 3/4 of adoptions for certain types of innovations. And crucially, we now understand it's often not noise at all, but actually really beneficial.
Beneficial. How? Why does reinvention help?
Because it allows the innovation to be tailored to fit the local context. If users can tweak it, adjust it to match their specific needs, their resources, their culture, their system size, they feel more ownership.
They make it their own.
Exactly. And that leads to much greater sustainability. The innovation is more likely to stick around, and there's less chance of people abandoning it later, discontinuance, compared to forcing a one-size-fits-all solution on everyone.
Can you give an example of positive reinvention?
Sure. The sources mention the DARE program, drug abuse resistance education in schools. The core idea was having a uniformed police officer teach an anti-drug curriculum.
Right. I remember DARE.
Well, the original curriculum had specific modules, maybe on things like gang resistance, that were relevant in some communities but not others. So many school systems reinvented it. They kept the core anti-drug message taught by the officer, but they dropped or modified the specific lessons that didn't fit their local student population's needs.
So they kept the function they wanted but adapted the form.
Precisely. Another example is city-level no-smoking ordinances. The core goal, protecting people from secondhand smoke, is usually the same, but the scope gets reinvented all the time.
How so?
Early adopting cities might have only banned smoking in, say, government buildings. Later adopters, learning from the pioneers, often implement much more comprehensive bans covering bars, restaurants, workplaces, even outdoor areas near doorways. The idea itself evolves as it spreads, often becoming stronger or better adapted through this process of reinvention.
We've looked at the structures, the individual process. Now let's talk about the people themselves. Who adopts when? If you plot adoption over time, you get that classic bell curve, right? And that lets us categorize people based on how quickly they jump on board.
Exactly. We divide the social system into 5 ideal types based on their innovativeness, which is just how early or late they adopt relative to everyone else.
So first out of the gate, the real pioneers.
Those are the innovators. They make up maybe the first 2.5% of adopters. They're characterized by being venturesome. They love risk, almost obsessed with the new.
What else defines them?
They tend to be cosmopolite, meaning their social networks stretch far beyond the local community. They read specialized journals, travel, talk to other innovators elsewhere. They also usually have the financial resources to absorb the loss if the innovation turns out to be a dud, which happens often with brand new things.
So they're crucial for bringing new ideas into the system from the outside world.
Absolutely vital for that. But here's a really key point the research makes. Innovators are rarely the most influential people within their local system.
Really? Why not? They're the first adopters.
Because they're often seen as, well, a bit different, maybe slightly deviant, too far ahead of the curve. Their judgment isn't always trusted by the mainstream because they seem willing to try anything. They might even be social isolates within the local network.
Okay, so if not the innovators, who holds the real persuasive power?
That falls to the next group. The early adopters, they make up about 13.5% of the system.
And what makes them different?
Early adopters are the local opinion leaders. They are highly respected within the community, well integrated into the social network. They serve as role models.
So they're innovative, but maybe more judicious.
Exactly. They watch the innovators, see what works, and then they make a careful, strategic choice to adopt. They're not reckless, but they're forward-thinking. And because they're respected, when they adopt, it significantly reduces the perceived risk and uncertainty for everyone else. Their adoption legitimizes the innovation.
They hold the highest degree of opinion leadership. That's the key takeaway.
Absolutely. Their endorsement is often what kicks off the rapid growth phase of that S-curve.
Okay, after the early adopters, we hit the bulk of the population.
Right. Next comes the early majority, about 34% of the system. Their defining characteristic is deliberation. They adopt just before the average member. They're not leaders, but they follow willingly once the idea is proven and legitimized by the early adopters. They need to see it working for people like them.
They think about it carefully.
Yes, and right after them comes the late majority, another 34%. Their watchword is skepticism.
Skeptical. So why do they adopt at all?
Usually out of necessity, either mounting peer pressure, everyone else is doing it, or clear economic necessity. They adopt after the innovation is clearly the norm, often when they feel they have to just to keep up.
Okay, innovators, early adopters, early majority, late majority. Who's left?
The final group, about 16%, are the laggards. As the name suggests, they are the very last people in the system to adopt an innovation.
What defines them?
Tradition is their main reference point. They tend to have lower social status, often limited financial resources. They're very localite. Their social network is almost entirely confined to their immediate peers, many of whom are also laggards. Information from the outside world doesn't reach them easily.
Now, it's easy to dismiss laggards as just stubborn or resistant to change.
It is easy, but the research cautions against that. It introduces the idea of system blame versus individual blame. Sometimes a laggard's rejection or very late adoption might be perfectly rational from their perspective.
How so?
The innovation, especially if it's expensive, complex, or requires large scale, might simply not be appropriate for their limited resources, their small farm size, or their specific circumstances. Rejecting it might be the smartest move for them. We shouldn't automatically assume the innovation is right for everyone.
That's a really important point for anyone trying to implement change. Consider if the rejection is actually logical for that subgroup.
Definitely. Now let's link these adopter types back to how influence flows. The classic study here is the diffusion of hybrid corn in Iowa back in the 30s and 40s.
Right. What did that show?
It perfectly illustrated the two-step flow of communication we talked about earlier. Farmers first heard about hybrid corn, gained knowledge from cosmopolite sources.
Like who?
Seed company salesmen, maybe agricultural scientists at the university, articles in farm journals. These were outside experts, mass media-like channels.
But that knowledge didn't automatically lead to adoption.
Not usually, no. The critical step, the persuasion that led to the decision to actually plant it, came from interpersonal channels.
Talking to
Neighbors, other local farmers, especially those respected early adopters, they were the most frequently cited source that convinced farmers to take the risk. The local network confirming its value was absolutely key to making the S-curve take off.
So awareness from outside, persuasion from inside.
That's the pattern. And we see the same network effect in organizations, too. The study of modern math spreading through Pittsburgh schools in the late 50s is another great example.
Modern math, that was a big curriculum change, wasn't it? How did that spread?
Well, it was introduced to Allegheny County in 1958 by just one school superintendent, a classic innovator, probably well-connected outside the county, willing to take a risk, but maybe not the most influential within the county network of superintendents.
And what happened? Did everyone jump on board?
Nope. He adopted it, and basically nothing happened for 2 years. The diffusion curve stayed flat.
So when did it finally take off?
It only started climbing 2 years later when a specific small group, a clique of 6 other superintendents, decided to adopt it. And crucially, that clique included the 3 most highly respected, most influential opinion leaders within the entire county school system.
Ah, the early adopters again.
Exactly. Once those key trusted figures gave it their stamp of approval by adopting, the rate of adoption across the whole county just shot up dramatically. It wasn't just the innovation being available, it was about it being adopted and legitimized by the right people in the network.
Okay, this network influence seems even more critical when we talk about technologies where interaction is the whole point.
Yeah.
Things like email or social media or phones, you can't use them alone.
Precisely. This leads to the concept of the critical mass for interactive innovations.
What do you mean by interactive?
Unlike hybrid corn, where one farmer benefits regardless of what their neighbor does, an interactive innovation like email or a fax machine has basically zero value to the first person who adopts it.
Right, who you gonna email?
Exactly. Its value depends entirely on other people also adopting it. This is called reciprocal interdependence. The innovation is only useful if others are using it too.
So what's the critical mass?
It's the point in the adoption process often estimated somewhere between 10% and 20% of potential adopters, where enough people have joined the network that the innovation's usefulness suddenly becomes self-sustaining. The benefits of joining clearly outweigh the costs or hassle of staying out.
And once you hit that point,
Adoption typically accelerates dramatically. The S-curve shoots upwards very steeply.
and what's really interesting here is how the value accumulates, isn't it?
It's totally different from non-interactive innovations. With hybrid corn, the early adopters influence the later ones. With email or phones, every later adopter actually increases the value of the technology for everyone who already adopted.
The network effect benefits the existing users, too.
Exponentially. The more people join, the more valuable the network becomes for everybody in it.
Cellular phones are a prime example of hitting critical mass quickly, right?
A textbook example. Think about how fast they spread globally, something like 1.1 billion sold in just the first decade or so after becoming widely available.
Why did they diffuse so rapidly?
Because they had an almost perfect combination of perceived attributes that appeal to adopters. Huge relative advantage mobility, communication anywhere. High compatibility, they worked with the existing telephone system people already understood. And crucially, high trialability and observability.
Meaning you could easily try one, maybe borrow a friend's, and you could constantly see other people using them and demonstrating the benefit.
Exactly. All those factors combined meant cell phones blew past the critical mass threshold very quickly in many societies, leading to that explosive global adoption rate.
Okay, so we've seen success is social, it's systemic, it depends on networks and perception. But this leads to a trickier question. Just because something spreads, does that automatically mean it's good? Is adoption always progress?
That's a crucial question.
Hmm.
And this final section deals with a sobering reality. Change agents, the people promoting innovations, are often pretty good at predicting the immediate form and function. What will it look like? What will it do?
But they often fail completely to predict its deeper meaning for the social system, the long-term ripple effects.
Exactly. This is the huge challenge of unintended consequences.
Every innovation has consequences, obviously.
Right. There are the direct consequences, the immediate results you expect and intend, but often it's the indirect consequences, the ones that ripple out later, often unforeseen, maybe undesirable, that have the biggest, most lasting impact.
The classic anthropological example here is the steel axe in Australia.
Yes, the study of the Yir Aboriginal tribe in the 1930s. Missionaries introduced steel axes, which were obviously far superior to the traditional stone axes the tribe used.
The direct consequence seems positive: easier wood cutting, more efficiency.
That was the anticipated, desirable direct consequence, increased material comfort. But the missionaries had no idea about the meaning of the stone axe within Yurorant culture.
What was its meaning?
The stone axe wasn't just a tool. It was a powerful symbol deeply tied to their kinship system, masculinity, and respect for elders. Only initiated men could own stone axes. Women, or younger boys, had to formally borrow one from an appropriate male relative, father, uncle, older brother. This constant borrowing reinforced the entire structure of male authority and generational respect.
The missionaries.
Unaware of all this, they just handed out the technologically superior steel axes indiscriminately to men, women, children, whoever, because they were just thinking of it as a better tool.
Undermining the entire social structure with one piece of technology.
Completely. The stone axe, the symbol of status, became obsolete overnight. The elder men lost their basis of power and prestige because women and younger men no longer needed to defer to them for this essential tool.
And the result?
Widespread social disorganization, a breakdown in the traditional kinship ties, confusion about roles, a collapse of the established hierarchy. The missionaries intended to help with labor, but they inadvertently fractured the culture.
And we see this failure to predict consequences, this social sleepwalking, even in huge, modern, publicly funded projects, like the mechanized tomato harvester.
Yes. Hard tomatoes, hard times. Developed largely with public money at the University of California. The explicit goal, the direct intended consequence, was to save the California processing tomato industry.
Why did it need saving?
Because the Bracero program, which had supplied cheap, temporary manual labor from Mexico, was ended. Farmers suddenly faced much higher labor costs for hand-picking tomatoes. The machine was designed to replace those workers.
And did it work, technically?
Oh, technically it was a huge success. By 1970, machines were harvesting virtually all processing tomatoes in California. It arguably did save the industry from leaving the state.
That the indirect consequences.
Massive, and mostly negative for many people. First, the social cost. An estimated 32,000 farm workers, mostly Hispanic, lost their seasonal jobs. This devastated many rural communities.
Okay, huge job losses.
What else? Second, economic consolidation. The harvester was incredibly expensive. Only large corporate farms could afford it. This drove thousands of smaller family farms out of tomato production, accelerating the shift to industrial agriculture.
And third, there was a cost to consumers, too.
Yes, the early machines were rough. They damaged the existing softer tomato varieties. So university researchers, again with public funds, had to breed a new kind of tomato, tougher skin, less juicy, maybe less flavorful, specifically to withstand mechanical harvesting. Consumers literally got harder tomatoes.
So the researchers were called social sleepwalkers because they focused only on the technical problem without seeing the massive social and economic disruption their solution would cause.
Exactly. Which brings us to the inseparability principle.
Meaning,
It basically states that the desirable and the undesirable consequences of a technology are often tangled together. You can't easily get the good without the bad. The effects are linked.
and the source material offers a group that seems to understand this intuitively.
Yes, the old order Amish. Their rejection of technologies like cars, tractors, or electricity isn't usually because they don't see the potential direct benefits saving labor, faster travel.
They reject them because they fear the indirect consequences.
Precisely. They are acutely aware of the potential social consequences. They worry that cars would allow young people to work further away, weakening the local community ties. They fear tractors might lead to larger farms, more debt, and greater dependence on the outside world's economy and energy.
So they deliberately choose to forego certain efficiencies to preserve their culture and social structure.
Right. They prioritize the long-term health of their social system over the short-term material advantages of certain innovations. They understand the inseparability principle perhaps better than many change agents.
Okay, one final really important systemic consequence: inequality. We know diffusion often increases the overall level of good in a system. More people get the benefit eventually. But how does it affect the distribution of those benefits? Is it fair?
This is where we see the communication effects gap. The consistent finding across decades of research is that, generally speaking, the diffusion of innovations tends to widen the socioeconomic gap between the advantaged and disadvantaged members of a system.
It increases inequality. How does that happen?
It happens primarily because of timing and access. The earliest adopters, who we called the UPs, typically those with more wealth, higher education, more connections outside the local system, cosmopolite, they have better access to information about the innovation early on.
Okay, they hear about it first.
They also have the financial resources to afford the initial risk and cost of adoption. And they have larger, more diverse social networks to get that crucial positive peer evaluation faster.
So they adopt sooner. Why is that such an advantage?
Because adopting early often allows them to capture windfall profits.
Windfall profits.
Yeah, think about farmers adopting hybrid corn early. They got significantly higher yields when the price for corn was still high, before everyone else adopted and increased the overall supply, driving the price down. Or early adopters of a new manufacturing process might capture market share before competitors catch up. They get a temporary monopoly rent, essentially.
So the rich get richer faster.
That's often the dynamic. By the time the late majority and laggards, the downs, finally adopt, often because they have to, the market conditions have changed. Prices might have fallen, the competitive advantage is gone. For them, adoption isn't about getting ahead, it's a defensive move just to stay in the game.
So the structural timing advantage inherently benefits those already better off.
That's the general tendency, yes. It creates or widens gaps.
And the most obvious modern example of this is
The digital divide. It's a perfect illustration of the communication effects gap playing out globally and within nations.
the gap between those who have access to and can use the internet and digital tech and those who can't.
Exactly. If you look at who the early adopters of the internet were, their profile perfectly matches the typical early adopter of almost any innovation. Higher socioeconomic status, more education, more urban, more connected.
And the gap is real. The stats you mentioned from the early 2000s.
Yeah, stark.
Yeah.
North America had around 479 internet users per 1,000 people back in 2001. Meanwhile, vast regions like the Middle East and Africa had only about 7 per 1,000. Huge disparities driven by lack of income, infrastructure, education, relevant content, all the factors that favor the already advantaged.
But the sources say this widening gap isn't necessarily inevitable, right?
Yeah.
It's a tendency, but it can be countered.
Yes, absolutely. The research is clear that inequality is not destiny. There are strategies for narrowing gaps. Interventions can be designed to make the diffusion process more equitable.
Like what? What can be done?
Well, one approach is for R&D agencies, especially public ones, to consciously focus their efforts on developing innovations tailored specifically to the needs and resource constraints of lower status or disadvantaged groups, instead of just letting the market drive innovation towards high-profit customers.
So, designing for the downs, not just the ups.
Exactly. Think simpler, cheaper, more rugged technologies. Another powerful strategy is creating social organization at the local level. Things like farming cooperatives, community technology centers, microcredit groups.
How does that help?
It allows lower status individuals who couldn't afford an expensive innovation on their own to pool their resources, share the risk, and collectively command the capital or skills needed to adopt. It helps them overcome the individual resource barrier.
So what's the big takeaway for us navigating this constant flood of new ideas and technologies today?
I think the biggest takeaway is that technological brilliance is never enough. If you're trying to spread an idea, launch products, start a movement, its success or failure hinges crucially on the social context.
Compatibility with norms, the influence of opinion leaders, the existing structures.
All of that. And when a seemingly great idea fails, don't just blame the tech or the users. Look for the systemic reasons. The failure is often structural, like QWERTY, or cultural, like boiling water in Las Molinas. It's rarely just a bad idea in isolation.
Okay, as we wrap up, let's offer one final thought for you, our listener. It's actually a critique of this whole field we've just explored.
Right. It's important to be aware of the inherent pro-innovation bias in a lot of diffusion research.
Pro-innovation bias, meaning the research tends to assume innovation is always good.
Essentially, yes. Think about who funds most diffusion studies. Government agencies wanting to promote a health practice, foundations pushing an educational reform, companies trying to sell a product. They want to see adoption succeed.
So researchers naturally tend to focus on successful diffusions.
They often do. There's less funding, less glory in studying why things failed, why people rejected an innovation, or digging deeply into the negative unintended consequences. It's easier to study the winners.
Like those social sleepwalker researchers with the tomato harvester. Maybe they weren't asking the hard questions about downsides.
Possibly. So the challenge for you listening to this is to actively fight that bias in how you evaluate change in your own world, your own organization, your own community.
Don't just assume new is always better.
Exactly. The next really big insight in understanding social change might come not from celebrating another success story, but from really dissecting a failure or understanding the legitimacy of rejection. We need to constantly challenge that easy assumption that adoption always equals progress.
So look beyond the form and function. Ask about the meaning. Ask about the long-term ripples, the potential downsides, the unintended consequences for the whole system.
Because as the year yarn and the tomato pickers learned, even well-intentioned innovations pursued without that deeper social awareness can still lead to hard times. Be critical. Think systemically.